Let me ask you a question that almost every leader avoids answering honestly. What do you already know that you're not acting on? Not what you hope will become clear someday, not what you're waiting to feel ready for, what you already know. Because the truth is, most leaders don't lack vision, they lack courage. They can see the future clearly enough, they just hesitate at the cost of pursuing it. And that hesitation, that quiet delay, well, that's where people slowly erode a sense of purpose. You see, vision doesn't disappear all at once. It fades through postponement. And in the lives of Milton Hershey, Walt Disney, Steve Jobs, there was a defining moment, not when they saw the vision, but when they decided to follow it, even though it would cost them comfort, security, reputation, certainty. So, welcome to this episode of A Call to Leadership. It's about that moment, the threshold where imagination demands courage, the point where purpose stops being inspiring and starts being expensive. Today, we're talking about courageous conviction, the kind of leadership that chooses connectedness to the vision over ease, truth over approval, purpose over comfort. So as you listen or watch, I want you to pay attention to where resistance rises in you. That resistance may not be fear. It might be a signal that you're standing at your own threshold. And this is episode 5 of Radical Purpose, the 6-part journey on our latest book, Radical Purpose. And this is where leadership gets real, friend. This is where leadership begins to pivot. I'm Dr. Nate Salah, I'm your host. And so this is courageous conviction, the leadership threshold where it finds its voice. But before we begin, I want you to do something with me. Just take a moment, wherever you are, and just pause. Because today's conversation is not casual. It's the hinge point of the entire Radical Purpose journey. Episode 1 through 4, if you haven't listened to them, you need to go back, helped us to understand how purpose forms, about the environment that plants the seeds, the traits that reveal the wiring, the skills that refine the capacity, and the spark, that sacred ignition where curiosity and imagination begin to whisper, follow me, there's something more. Episode 5 is where we stand at the threshold between where and who we have been and who we must become. It's the moment every visionary leader faces, the moment where imagination is no longer enough and the desire must become decision. It's the moment where purpose demands courage. I want to ask you something right now. I want you to answer honestly. What vision in your life is waiting on your courage? Not your talent, not your experience, not your resources, not your timing, your courage. Because here is the unspoken truth about leadership. Vision will give you the picture, but conviction gives you the permission. Without conviction, vision is a daydream. Without conviction, vision becomes lack of destiny. And this is where we begin today. You see, every visionary, every leader who has vision reaches a moment, a line, a threshold where something inside of them says, I know what I must do, but doing it will cost me something. That moment, that internal intersection of fear and purpose, it's the birthplace of leadership. Some never cross the line. Some stay comfortable, some play safe, some protect reputation over responsibility. But the visionaries we study in this journey, Hershey, Disney, Jobs, they crossed the line. Not because they were fearless, but because they chose conviction over comfort. You see, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the refusal to be ruled by it. And I want to pause here and ask you again, where have you been waiting for the fear to disappear before you act? What if fear isn't supposed to disappear? What if leadership is learning to move with fear as a passenger, not a driver? This is the threshold we're exploring today. The moment where vision demands risk. The moment where comfort becomes incompatible with calling. The moment where the spark from episode 4 becomes a fire you can no longer suppress. So I want to locate ourselves in the narrative. Episode 4 ended in the place of imagination, the sacred spark where a leader sees what others cannot see. But imagination on its own, it's weightless. Vision without action is potential without incarnation. You see, there's always a valley, an emotional, spiritual, psychological valley between imagining the future and building it. And that valley requires courage. Let me say it this way. Vision is the gift. Conviction is the grind. Courage is the gate. Every leader passes through the gate. Hershey stood before the gate when he contemplated leaving a flourishing caramel business to pursue, of all things at the time, milk chocolate. A product no American had mastered, no banker believed in. Disney stood at the gate when every financial advisor, every animator, every distributor insisted that a feature-length animated film was foolish, childish, impossible. Jobs stood before that gate every time he pushed his teams beyond what they knew how to do, not because he wanted perfection, but because he saw a future where technology could become intimate, elegant, human. Their visions were extraordinary, but their courage was the difference maker. So let me ask you directly, has God ever put something on your heart that felt too big, too risky, too unlike the person you've always been? And have you been trying to negotiate with the call? Trying to find a safer version of obedience? Trying to find a way to fulfill the vision without paying the price? Every leader tries that negotiation at some point. Every leader eventually discovers the same truth, friend. There's no discounted path to purpose. There's only courage or compromise. And compromise over time becomes regret. Now, what exactly is courageous conviction? I want to define it in a way that every leader, every entrepreneur, every listener, every viewer can grasp. Courageous conviction, it's that internal decision to honor the truth you see, even when the world doubts it, even when the path is unclear, even when the risk is great, and even when the cost is personal. Courageous conviction is not hype, not emotion, not adrenaline. It's not temporary bravery. It's this long obedience in the same direction. It's an unwavering alignment between your inner truth and your outer action. It is the moment where purpose becomes a promise you make to yourself, a promise you make to your future self, a promise you make to the world you have been called to impact. Let me tell you something you may not want to hear, and yet you need to hear it. Courageous conviction always looks irresponsible to the comfortable. Always. When Hershey risked his caramel company to pursue chocolate, people called him reckless. When Disney mortgaged everything for Snow White, people called him delusional. When Jobs insisted the Macintosh needs beauty, simplicity, personality, engineers called him unreasonable. You see, comfortable people call courageous leaders irresponsible because comfort cannot comprehend conviction. I want to ask you something. Who in your life has been trying to talk you out of the vision God put inside of you? And a harder question, have you been trying to talk yourself out of it? Because here's the truth. The voice that tries to stop you from stepping into courage is rarely the voice of wisdom. It's often the voice of comfort, wearing the costume of caution, friend, because purpose doesn't negotiate with comfort. Purpose demands courage. So before we move into this next idea, and begin unpacking the first major concept of this chapter, I want to ask you to ask yourself 3 questions. Slowly, honestly, deeply. Number 1, where is my vision asking me to be brave? Maybe it's in your business. Maybe it's in your family. Maybe it's in your calling. Maybe it's in your conversations that you've been avoiding. Maybe it's in launching something new. Maybe it's in letting something go. 2, what have I been postponing because I'm waiting to feel ready? Leaders don't wait for readiness. Leaders move and grow into readiness. 3, what would my life look like 1 year from now if I finally committed to the vision I've been circling around? Let that picture rise in you. See it, feel it, honor it, because this episode 5, is the moment where you stop circling and you start crossing the threshold. In segment 2, this next area of thought, we're going to explore the first major concept. Vision always requires comfort, and no visionary ever outruns that truth. All right, here we go. Now, I want you to think about this area of your life. When we're talking about formation, not only of a vision, but the courage to walk it through. So if the first thought was placing us at the threshold, that internal moment where vision demands courage, this is about what happens immediately after we step across it. Because here is something every leader must learn early. Vision does not remove discomfort. Vision introduces it. Discomfort is not a sign that we're doing something wrong. It's often the clearest indicator that we're doing something meaningful. And no one illustrates that more clearly in some ways than stories around these guys, Milton and Hershey. You see, discomfort was not the enemy of vision, it was its companion for him. And we often talk about vision as if it brings clarity and peace and confidence, but that's only half the story. Vision brings clarity about the future and discomfort about the present. You see, vision exposes the gap between where we are and where we believe we're called to go. That gap is uncomfortable by definition. And here's a mistake that many emerging leaders make. They interpret discomfort as danger, but leaders learn a critical distinction along the way. Not all discomfort is a warning. Some discomfort is an invitation. You see, Milton Hershey learned this the hard way, and he learned it repeatedly. You see, by the time Hershey stood at the crossroads of caramel and chocolate, he was not desperate, and that detail matters. Too often we imagine visionary risk as something people take when they have nothing to lose. But Hershey, he had something to lose. You see, his caramel business was stable. It was profitable. It was well respected. He had customers, he had processes, he had momentum, and yet, inside, he felt unsettled. I want to pause here and ask you something important. Have you ever felt uncomfortable? Not because things were bad, but because they were no longer aligned. That's a very different kind of discomfort. You see, that's not a crisis, that's a calling. And Hershey's discomfort wasn't driven by failure, it was driven by vision. So you see, he had seen something new. Chocolate as a mass product. And once he saw it, man, he couldn't unsee it. That's the moment discomfort begins to work for a leader. Because once vision reveals a future, friend, comfort in the present becomes impossible. Let me say that again because it's foundational. Once you see the future clearly, comfort in the present becomes disobedience. That's not guilt. That's leadership clarity. And here's why many leaders get stuck. And I want you to listen closely because this may apply directly to your life right now. Stability feels responsible. Predictability feels wise. Comfort feels safe. And yet, vision rarely grows in stable environments. Why? Because stability rewards preservation. Vision demands transformation. Hershey understood this intuitively. Caramel had taken him as far as caramel could take him. Chocolate required a leap, a financial leap, a reputational leap, a technical leap, a psychological leap. Maybe you understand. Discomfort wasn't incidental, it was essential. So where in your life have you mistaken stability for faithfulness? And even more pointed, what vision have you delayed because your current situation is good enough? You see, some understand that others never fully grasp. The greatest threat to purpose is not failure. It's comfort that slowly numbs conviction. Hershey was willing to disrupt his own success, and that willingness separated him from countless others who plateaued. I want to elevate this conversation next. Discomfort is not merely an emotional state, friend. In visionary leadership, discomfort is a competency. It's the leader's ability to remain steady while uncertain. Think about that. Unsettled moves forward, misunderstood acts decisively, outcomes are unclear. Hershey demonstrated this competency repeatedly. When he sold his caramel company to fund chocolate production, he didn't have guarantees. He had conviction. When early chocolate batches failed, and they failed miserably, he didn't retreat, he refined. When bankers doubted the market, he didn't argue, he built. That's not recklessness, that's disciplined courage. So, how do you respond to discomfort? Do you retreat? Do you rationalize? Do you delay? Do you distract? Do you seek permission? Do you deflect? Do you overanalyze? Or do you learn to walk through it? Visionaries don't eliminate discomfort. They train themselves to operate within it. That is a defining leadership skill. That is the internal world of a visionary leader. And I'm going to give you even more to step inside with. Not the speeches, not the success stories, the inner dialogue. You see, for Hershey, the dialogue likely sounded something like this. This feels risky, but it feels right. This may cost me, but it aligns with what I see. I could stay where I am, but I would be betraying what I know. You see, visionaries don't lack doubt. That's a mistake. They simply refuse to let doubt veto conviction. So for you, what conversation are you having with yourself right now about your vision? Is it dominated by fear, or is it anchored in truth? Courageous conviction is not loud self-talk, friend. It's quiet resolve. Now, let's be responsible leaders and make an important distinction. Not all discomfort should be embraced. Some discomfort, it does warn us. It warns us of dangerous misalignment, ego-driven ambition. So you might be thinking, okay, Nate, how do we discern the difference? Well, here's a simple framework. Healthy discomfort, it pulls you toward growth. It aligns with your deepest values. It expands your sense of purpose. It requires sacrifice, not compromise. And often clarifies who you are becoming. In contrast, harmful discomfort, it pushes you away from integrity. It stems from fear or insecurity. It seeks validation more than impact. You find that erodes these relationships and conscience. It shrinks your sense of self. Hershey's discomfort passed his test. It didn't inflate his ego. It deepened his mission. It didn't isolate him from humanity. It led him toward service. You see, visionary discomfort often comes wrapped in responsibility. If your discomfort is calling you to build, serve, create, contribute, pay attention, that may be courage calling. So before we move into this next thought where we're going to explore the independent spirit through Walt Disney, I want you to sit with this question. Where is discomfort inviting me to grow rather than warning me to stop? Don't rush past it. Sit with it. Write it down if you can, because discomfort is not the enemy or the end of the story. It's often the beginning of obedience to the vision that's been placed inside of you. And visionary leadership has always belonged to those who are uncomfortable for the sake of something greater than themselves. So we're about to examine the second major concept here, the independent spirit. Why visionary leaders must learn to think against the crowd before they can lead it. You see? Here it is, where we move from discomfort to the next essential pillar of courageous conviction. That independent spirit, this part leans heavily into visionary leadership formation. We're going to look at Walt Disney as a primary illuminator, not as mythology, but as a living case study in how leaders learn to think before they lead. You see? Okay. If the last thought taught us that vision always introduces discomfort, this section reveals something even more challenging. Visionary leadership requires an independent spirit. It's the courage to think differently long before anyone agrees with us. And this is where many leaders hesitate. Not because they lack vision, but because they fear isolation. Because they think independently is thinking lonely. And no one demonstrates this more clearly than Walt Disney. You know, he had a misunderstood virtue of independence. When we hear the phrase independent spirit, many people misunderstand it. They assume it means stubbornness or defiance or arrogance or refusal to listen. Maybe it's rebellion for rebellion's sake. Black sheepness, struggled with that. Visionary independence is not one of those things. I want to define it carefully. An independent spirit is the ability to reason, imagine, decide without outsourcing your conviction to the crowd. It's not anti-community, it's pre-community. You see, visionaries must first see alone before they can invite others to see with them. And Walt Disney learned this lesson early, painfully early. You see, Disney had an early collision with the crowd. I want to rewind to Kansas City, the early 1900s. Walt is young, ambitious, creative, hopeful, and he launches Laugh-O-Gram Studios. Now, this is filled with ideas, humor, innovation, and quite the heart, you can imagine. It fails, not because the vision was weak, but because the world wasn't ready for it. You see, Walt lost the studio. He lost the equipment, he lost the money, and he lost the approval of those who told him to be practical. Now, I want you to pause right there. This is a moment most leaders never recover from. Failure plus ridicule plus isolation equals conformity. And most people retreat at this point. They adjust their dreams downward. They become more reasonable. They choose acceptance over conviction. But Walt did something different. He didn't abandon his vision. He refined it. And that's the mark of an independent spirit. Have you ever had a vision fail and interpret that failing as a verdict on your calling? Visionary leaders don't. They understand that failure often clarifies independence. And here's something you need to understand as a leader. The crowd is always late to vision. Not because the crowd is evil, but because people, they can't see. Vision operates ahead of evidence. Most people need proof, validation, precedent, consensus. Visionaries, they work with insight, intuition, imagination, conviction. When Walt proposed Snow White, a feature-length film, animated of all things, the response was nearly unanimous. It will fail. It's childish. It's too expensive. No one will sit through a cartoon that long. Do you hear the pattern? The crowd measures vision by current realities. Visionaries measure reality by future possibility. And that gap is where independent thinking is required. Where in your life have you been waiting for consensus before acting, even though you already know what you're called to do? You see, leadership does not begin with consensus. It begins with clarity. And hey friend, it's your friend, Dr. Nate Salah, and I want to personally invite you to something that's been on my heart for a long time. On October 3rd in St. Louis, we're gathering a room full of faith-driven leaders, entrepreneurs, professionals, lifelong learners at our inaugural G3 Summit. It's not just another business event. It's a sacred space where we lay down the pressure, the performance, the pursuit of empty success. We step into a calling that's aligned with God's best for us. I believe you were created to lead with purpose, to give from overflow. Go love radically in your home, your business, and your community. That's what G3 is all about. Grow purposefully, give generously, go love radically. If you've been longing for deeper meaning in your leadership, if you're ready to consecrate your influence to something eternal, this summit was designed just for you. You can visit us at mygg3summit.com. Reserve your spot today, and I cannot wait to see you there. There's a tension involved in that. And this really matters. It matters deeply. Visionary independence is not isolationism. See, Disney didn't reject people. He rejected limitations. He didn't ignore counsel. He filtered it. He listened, but he decided. That's the discipline of independence. Let me say it this way. Independent leaders do not refuse advice. They refuse abdication. They don't surrender their inner knowing to external approval. That takes courage, because independence invites criticism, and criticism hurts more when you care deeply, which visionaries always do. Let me ask you something personal. Whose approval have you been subconsciously waiting for before stepping forward? A parent, a spouse, a boss, an investor, a peer group, a mentor. Independence doesn't mean dishonoring voices, friend. It means not allowing voices to drown out the conviction. I want to take this a little deeper with you. Why is independent thinking so difficult? Well, I think in part because human beings are wired for belonging. We fear exclusion more than failure. Visionaries experience this fear too, but they subordinate it to purpose. Disney knew that if he waited for everyone to agree with him, Snow White would never be made. He also knew something else. If the vision is truly visionary, agreement will always come after execution, not before. That's the paradox of leadership. Agreement is the reward of courage, not the permission for it. What would you pursue if you knew approval was not required? I want you to sit with that, because that question reveals where independence is being forged or avoided. It could be even a moral responsibility. Now let's elevate this a bit further. Independent thinking is not merely strategic, it's moral. Why? Because leaders influence others. And if leaders do not think independently, they simply amplify the dominance of the moment. Visionary leaders carry responsibility for the future, not for the present alone. Disney didn't just build a company, he reshaped culture. And culture is always shaped by those willing to think first and stand firm. So I want to ask you, what future are you responsible for shaping? And who will shape it if you don't? That question turns independence from preference into duty, friend. I want to be honest. Independent leaders pay a price. They are misunderstood. They are doubted. They are labeled unrealistic. They are pressured to conform. Walt Disney experienced all of this, but he also experienced something else: alignment, peace, clarity. The quiet confidence of knowing He was honoring what he saw. And that internal alignment sustained him when external support wavered. Let me ask you a question. Would you rather be misunderstood for a season or misaligned for a lifetime? Worthy leadership chooses misunderstanding. Before we move into the next segment, where we explore Steve Jobs and the courage to redefine reality, I want to give you a practical leadership practice. This week, ask yourself, what belief do I hold that differs from the dominant narrative around me? Where have I softened my conviction to avoid tension? What decision have I delayed because I wanted approval more than clarity? What truth do I already know but haven't acted on? Write those down. You see, independent thinking begins in silence long before it shows up in action. So far, we've learned vision introduces discomfort. Discomfort requires courage. Courage demands independent thinking. But independence alone is not enough, friend. So we're going to examine the third essential quality of courageous conviction, the courage to redefine reality itself, to see what is, imagine what could be, hold that future so firmly that it begins to influence the present. This is where Steve Jobs enters the conversation. You see, I want to talk about where courageous conviction moves from independent thinking into its most misunderstood form, the courage to redefine that reality. So, Steve Jobs, of course, is not a personality study, but as a case study in the visionary conviction under this idea, under pressure. Are you ready? All right, here we go. So if segment 3 showed us that visionary leaders must learn to think independently, this segment of the conversation reveals the next step. And it's the most misunderstood of all. Visionary leaders must have the courage to redefine reality itself. Now, I want to be careful here because this concept is often caricatured. When people hear phrases like redefining reality or seeing a future others can't see, well, sometimes people assume they're arrogant, delusional, massive ego, detachment from facts. Not what we're talking about. Visionary leaders do not deny reality. They just interpret it differently. And no leader embodies this tension more clearly in many ways than Steve Jobs. So I want to define this clearly because clarity protects us from confusion. Redefining reality is not ignoring facts. It's refusing to let present limitations dictate future possibilities. You see, visionaries see what is, but they are not imprisoned by it. They operate with this sort of dual awareness, this sober understanding of constraints and a vivid conviction about what could exist beyond them. It's not fantasy, it's leadership. So Steve Jobs, he lived in this space constantly. You see, Jobs is often described as having this reality distortion field, well documented. That phrase, it's usually delivered with a smirk, as if it proves he was unreasonable or manipulative. But I want to reinterpret that phrase with you through the lens of leadership development. And what people experienced around Jobs was not distortion, it was conviction so clear it disrupted assumptions. I'll repeat that. It was conviction so clear that it disrupted assumptions. Jobs didn't deny engineering limits. He challenged teams to rethink them. He didn't pretend time constraints didn't exist. He asked whether they were necessary. He didn't dismiss complexity. He insisted it be mastered, not accepted. This distinction matters. So for you, how often do you accept that's just the way it is without ever asking, does it have to be? Worthy leadership begins with that question. Now, I want to invite you into the inner world of a leader who redefines reality. let's step into Steve Jobs' internal world, not emotionally, cognitively. You see, when Jobs looked at a computer, he didn't see a machine. He saw an extension of human creativity, this tool for expression, an instrument of empowerment. So where engineers, they saw components, Jobs saw an experience. Where teams saw obstacles, Jobs saw opportunity. Where the market saw consumers, Jobs saw humans. This is not stubbornness, friend. This is a visionary perception. Redefining reality begins with how you see it. So I want to pause here and ask you something. What do you see when you look at your work, your organization, your calling? Is it a problem to manage? Or is it a possibility to unlock? Friend, that answer reveals more about our leadership than our title ever will. You see, here's the tension, and this is where courage is required. Leaders who redefine reality make people uncomfortable. Why? Because they disrupt settled assumptions. They question inherited limitations. They expose complacency. They challenge convenience. Jobs made people uncomfortable because he wouldn't accept mediocrity, even when mediocrity was normalized. And discomfort often masquerades as criticism. People say he's unrealistic. She's impossible to work with. He doesn't understand how things really work. But what they were really saying is, you see a future that makes our present feel insufficient. You see, vision does that. Have you ever softened your vision because it made others uncomfortable? If so, friend, you're not alone. But worthy leadership learns something essential. Comfort is not the metric of truth. Alignment is. And redefining reality requires the courage to hold tension and not resolve it too quickly. Tension between current capabilities, the future vision, present facts, emerging possibilities, what people believe is feasible, and what might be necessary. Jobs lived in that tension. He held the future in his mind so vividly that it exerted pressure on the present. And over time, the present began to bend. Let me say this carefully. Visionary leaders don't force the future into existence. They hold it long enough for others to grow into it. That takes courage, because holding tension invites criticism, and criticism tests conviction. And this is an important distinction, especially for leaders who care deeply about humility and service. Arrogance centers on ego, and it seeks control. It dismisses others. It refuses accountability. Conviction centers on purpose. It seeks alignment. It invites excellence. It embraces responsibility. Jobs wasn't perfect. None of our exemplars were. But what sustained his leadership was not ego, it was clarity. He knew what he was building. He knew why it mattered, and he refused to dilute the vision to make others comfortable. So for you, where in your leadership have you mistaken conviction for arrogance and therefore pulled back when you should have pressed forward? That question matters more than you think. I want to bring this into your life in a practical way with just a simple leadership exercise, one that Jobs practiced instinctively. Take one situation in your life right now and ask, what is the accepted reality here? What assumptions are we operating under? What limitations are considered fixed? Which of those limitations might actually be negotiable? What future state do I believe is possible, or even if I can't fully explain how yet? It's not about recklessness. It's about reframing. See, worthy leaders, visionary leaders, do not start with solutions. They start with questions that expand possibility. And here's the truth we often avoid. Purpose is not fulfilled by maintaining reality. It's fulfilled by transforming it. Hershey transformed how people experience chocolate. Disney transformed how people experience story and joy. Jobs transformed how people experience technology. None of them accepted reality as fixed. They respected reality, but they refused to be confined by it. And that refusal was an act of courage. So I want to ask you one final question before we transition. What reality in your life or leadership have you accepted that your vision is quietly asking you to challenge? Sit with that. Because in this last segment, we're going to examine what happens when courage is no longer theoretical, when conviction becomes costly, and leaders must decide whether that vision is worth the price. So here we go. This is where courageous conviction stops being an idea and becomes a costly reality. This last thought is intentionally sobering. It's formative. It's deeply connected in tone, because this is where leaders either mature or retreat. So, the price visionary leaders are willing to pay. I want to slow down for just a moment. Up to this point, we talked about courage in ways that are inspiring, even energizing. But now we arrive at a place where courage or courageous conviction, it becomes real. Because eventually, every visionary leader encounters this truth. Conviction will cost you something you care about. Not hypothetically, not symbolically, actually. Time, money, reputation, relationships, security, certainty, control. It's the moment where leadership stops being aspirational and becomes sacrificial. And every leader we've studied, Hershey, Disney, Jobs, crossed this moment, not once, but repeatedly. You know, there's a myth around painless purpose. I want to confront that dangerous myth head on. There's a version of leadership culture that implies if your vision is right, things will eventually get easier. That's only partially true, friend. Vision doesn't eliminate cost. It clarifies it. Purpose doesn't remove sacrifice. It gives sacrifice meaning. Visionary leaders don't avoid pain. They choose which pain is worth enduring. And that distinction matters. For you, what cost have you been hoping your vision would not require? Because that cost may be the very threshold you must cross. Milton Hershey, he's often remembered for his generosity, his town, the school, the philanthropy, all that. But we rarely talk about what that generosity cost him personally. He gave away control. He gave away wealth. He gave away legacy, ownership. He structured his life so that what he built would outlive him and just not belong to him. That's not accidental generosity. That's conviction. You see, Hershey understood something many leaders never fully grasp. If the vision is truly bigger than you, it will eventually require you to loosen your grip. His conviction cost him the right to cling. So for us, what are we holding on to too tightly because we're afraid of what obedience might cost? Sometimes conviction costs not what we lack, friend, but what we've already earned. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about Walt Disney's comfort, because his cost was relentless. Snow White nearly destroyed him. He mortgaged everything. He carried crushing debt. He endured ridicule. He sacrificed sleep, health, peace. He aged visibly, actually, under the pressure. And here's the part that matters. Walt could have stopped. He had success already. He had influence already. He had credibility already. He had Mickey. But conviction doesn't ask whether you can stop. It asks whether you should. So, for you, where in your life would stopping be easier, but continuing be faithful? Conviction costs comfort. Not because God is cruel, but because comfort cannot coexist with transformation. It just doesn't happen. And then there's Steve, whose cost was perhaps the most psychologically severe. You know, he was ousted from Apple. Think about that. the company he helped build, the vision he birthed, the mission he embodied. Let that sink in. Conviction didn't protect him from rejection. In fact, conviction invited it. Jobs lost status, lost control, lost community, lost identity. And yet, that loss became the refining fire. The clarity he gained during exile shaped the most significant chapter of his leadership. Let me ask you something deeply personal. What part of your identity might conviction require you to surrender? Because sometimes purpose doesn't just cost possessions, friend. It costs self-concept. You see, every worthy leader eventually faces this moment. Is the vision worth the cost? That question is unavoidable. And there's no universal answer, only a personal one. Courageous conviction, it's not reckless martyrdom. It is informed surrender. It's choosing to pay a price on purpose. And let me say this very carefully. If your vision never cost you anything, it is likely not transforming anything. Transformation always disrupts equilibrium. And disruption always demands sacrifice. Now, this is critical. Not every cost is holy. Not every loss is meaningful. So how do we know? How do leaders discern the difference? Well, I want to think of 3 questions that are clarifying this. And 1, is the cost aligned with my deepest values or my ego? If ego is driving it, pause. 2, does the sacrifice serve something beyond me? If it only serves status, reconsider. Or 3, does this loss clarify my purpose or does it erode my integrity? Friend, the conviction deepens integrity, not diminishes it. Hershey, cost led to service. Disney, to joy. Jobs, to refinement. The cost clarified their calling. That's how you know. Before we move into this last bit of this segment, I want you to look honestly at your own life. Ask yourself, what has my vision already cost me? Where is it beginning to add cost now? What might it cost me next? And then ask the hardest question, am I willing to pay that price? Or am I hoping the vision will lower its demands? Vision never lowers its demands, friend. It only waits. Vision introduces discomforts. Discomforts demand independence. Independence requires courage to redefine reality. And conviction eventually becomes costly. Which brings me to the final and most personal thought of this episode. And thanks for sticking with me. The internal war every leader must face, the tension between doubt and conviction. This is where leadership becomes deeply spiritual, I think. This is where courage is forged, not in public, but in private. You see, leadership, effective leadership has an internal war. This is where visionary leadership, worthy leadership is finally decided. So I want to go inward now. Everything we've talked about so far, discomfort, independence, redefining reality, costly conviction, all of it eventually converges into one place. And it's not in the boardroom. It's not in the marketplace. It's not on a stage. It's not in public, but it's inside the leader. Because the greatest battle of visionary leadership is never external. It's internal. And every leader who walks the path of courageous conviction must face this war. Doubt versus conviction. See, there's a myth of the fearless leader. I want to dismantle that myth that quietly damages a lot of leaders. Worthy leadership, often portrayed, especially visionary ones, as supremely confident, unshakable, immune to uncertainty. It's not true. Hershey doubted, Disney doubted, Jobs doubted. So many of us, we all doubt. They questioned themselves. They felt fear. They wrestled internally. They wondered if they were wrong. The difference was not the absence of doubt. The difference was where doubt was allowed to sit. Doubt was never allowed to occupy the driver's seat. I want to say this very carefully. Doubt is not disqualifying, but doubt in control is. Every leader hears the voice of doubt. The question is whether that voice becomes an advisor or a ruler. Leadership is formed in private long before it's tested in public. I really believe the most consequential leadership moments happen when no one's watching, late at night, early in the morning, whether in quiet reflection or prayer, in wrestling and decision. I want you to think about the inner dialogue of each of these visionaries, how they may have carried them, not as a quotation, but as a pattern. You see, Hershey, after another failed venture, likely asked, am I chasing something unrealistic, or am I simply early? I know Disney had to have been stirring and staring at mounting debt, likely wondering, is this vision faithful or is it foolish? And I can imagine Jobs, after being ousted from Apple, almost certainly wrestling with, was I right? Or was I just difficult? These are not weak questions. They are necessary questions. Visionary leaders do not silence doubt. They interrogate it. There's a difference between doubt and discernment, and this distinction matters deeply. Not all inner resistance is doubt. Some of it is discernment. Discernment asks, is this aligned with who I am called to be? Is this consistent with my deepest values? Is this vision serving something beyond my ego? Doubt, on the other hand, well, it whispers, who do you think you are? What if you fail? What will people think? What if you lose everything? Discernment, it sharpens conviction, friend. Doubt erodes it. If you're going to be a worthy leader, to learn to tell the difference. So ask yourself the question, which voice has been loudest in your internal conversation lately? The one that clarifies or the one that cautions endlessly? Because you're going to have a difficult task. We all do. We have to hold those convicting emotions. And here's something we don't talk about enough in leadership development. Worthy leaders must earn and learn to hold contradictory emotions at the same time. Confidence and humility, hope and fear, clarity and uncertainty, peace and urgency. Hershey believed deeply in his vision. He still felt anxiety about risk. Disney, he trusted his imagination. He still experienced exhaustion, despair. Jobs, he held unwavering clarity about design and simplicity and still struggled with insecurity and belonging. Leadership maturity is not emotional. It's not emotional simplicity, anyway. It's emotional capacity. And let me ask you something personal. Do you allow yourself to feel uncertainty, or do you interpret it as weakness? Visionary leaders don't suppress uncertainty, friend. They learn to carry it without surrendering direction. And every leader reaches a moment, often many moments, where an internal decision must be made. Not a decision about strategy, not a decision about whether or not I'm going to be tactical. It's a decision about allegiance. Will I trust the vision I've been given or retreat to what feels safe? Will I move forward imperfectly or wait indefinitely for certainty? Will I act in alignment with conviction or negotiate with fear? This is where leadership becomes moral. Because in that moment, you are not deciding what to do. You are deciding who you will be. Now, courageous conviction is rarely dramatic. It doesn't always announce itself. Most often, it sounds like a quiet internal resolve. I don't know exactly how this is going to work, but I know I must move forward. I am afraid, but fear will not determine my direction. I may be misunderstood, but misalignment would cost me more. Friend, that resolve doesn't eliminate doubt. It simply outranks it. So ask yourself, what decisions have you been postponing because you've been waiting for the doubt to disappear? Conviction does not wait for doubt to leave. It moves in spite of it. And it's at its deepest level, courageous conviction, it's spiritual. Because it requires trust, not blind trust, grounded trust. Trust that obedience matters, integrity is worth protecting, purpose. It's not accidental, friend. Your life is not random. Hershey trusted that generosity mattered. Disney trusted that joy mattered. Jobs trusted that beauty and humanity mattered. Each of them aligned their lives with something they believed was worth the cost, and that belief sustained them when logic alone couldn't. So what do you believe is worth building, even if it costs you? That answer will reveal your conviction. So before we close, I want to look at ourselves honestly, not critically, but truthfully. I want us to ask ourselves, what am I wrestling? Where am I wrestling internally right now? What fear keeps resurfacing? What conviction keeps returning? What decision have I delayed because it feels heavy? Now, ask the most important question. If I look back on this season 5 years from now, what decision would I wish I had the courage to make today? Sit with that. Because leadership clarity often arrives before leadership courage. That brings me to the close of this episode. We've learned vision demands discomfort. Discomfort requires independence. Independence requires courage to redefine reality. And conviction becomes costly. Every leader must fight the internal war between doubt and conviction. So, when we get to the next episode, when courageous conviction is sustained over time, it's going to produce fruit, friend. It's going to create impact. It's going to build more than a bottom line. And in the next episode, we're going to explore what happens when purpose pays, not just financially, but relationally, culturally, generationally. And we're going to examine how these 3 leaders built organizations that outlived them because conviction was followed by stewardship. And until then, remember this, you do not need to eliminate doubt to lead well. You need to decide who gets the final word. And courageous conviction always has the final word. We did it again. Thank you so much for being a part of our program. We thank you, and we couldn't do it without you. If you've been blessed by this show, we would just ask that you give us an unfiltered review and share with the world how God is speaking to you through a call to leadership. You can do it on Apple or any of the podcast platforms, a call to leadership. And we thank you again. God bless you.